I'm gonna start. Yeah. I'm gonna get us into it. What's up, and welcome into this week's edition of the Above Average Dynasty Podcast. We are making sweeping changes week in and week out. A couple weeks ago we changed the time. Now you can see our faces for better or for worse. But I am your host, as always, Charlie, with my good friend Coolaak. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, and it's good to be here. And I love these changes, man. I think everyone's gonna love these changes. So
we'll find it. We'll certainly find out.
We'll find out. Yeah.
We've made the changes. I've been slacking on my duties. Please, if you're on the YouTube channel, please comment and let us know how you feel about these changes. And subscribe if you want to see more of us make these changes, because we're going to just keep making them. And we're going to keep trying to, like we said, I think a couple months ago, just increment a little bit more, better and better and better each week.
That's it. If we can just make something better each week, I feel like we're making progress. So
absolutely. And for the first thing, what we're going to do this week is we are going to do a rookie mock draft. We are, or at least we're going to go as far as we can. The Coolaak's got a hard stop at about an hour and 15 minutes, so we're just gonna alternate picking players and talking our way through it and talking how we feel about different players. But without any further ado, I say we jump right into it. And who's getting the first pick? Because I think we feel a little differently in certain ways about the first
Washington's
pick.
on the clock.
Washington's on the clock because Caleb is the only player locked in to a NFL draft team at this point, I feel like.
Why don't you go ahead? And get us in?
Okay, well, that sounds good. I think I'm going to go and I'm going to check this player. And it's kind of crazy if I go to rookies only to me, it's kind of crazy that Marvin is above Caleb, and maybe that's a hot take. Maybe that's just because we as a community have a better feeling that Marvin is going to be a superstar than Caleb. Yeah. Obviously, the hit rate on outstanding wide receivers is better than the hit rate on outstanding quarterbacks. But to me, it's just really a ceiling versus ceiling thing. I think Marvin at his ceiling is, we've seen what a wide receiver tops out in terms of their value. But when you get these high level elite quarterbacks that have the potential to be top 3 overall pieces, I think you have to take your stab at it, especially if you're sitting at the 101, unless you're like the Bears and you manage to take advantage of some hapless sucker. You're probably having to rebuild, and you want to rebuild around a quarterback more than you want to rebuild around a wide receiver.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was 50-50 probably a few months ago, but as we were talking about pre-pod, it feels like the pundits, it feels like smokescreen season has kind of murkied up exactly where the line between Caleb and like Drake May and Jayden Daniels is, and then also the line between Marvin Harrison and Nabers is. So I think you now... Again, I was more 50-50 a few months ago, but I think you're right. You can build around a quarterback. Their ceiling is worth more. Their VORP, their value above replacements more. As much as I like Marvin Harrison, there's a lot more people who are willing to go punt wide receiver builds than there are punt QB builds, right? So I go with.
Let's see how far you get with a punt QB build. That's not going to take you very far in life, especially because and what I'll say, we're going to do, our format for this is going to be a 12-team start 11 super flex. So you're just going to have a lot more scarcity at the quarterback position than you're going to have at wide receiver position.
Agree, right. And you're like, let's say, again, we're all assuming that Marvin goes to, we can pretty much pencil in Caleb to the Bears, right? And we were talking about how having Keenan as your 1A, 1B type situation is just ridiculously strong. We're assuming that Marvin Harrison goes to the Cardinals, but somebody could make a strong push and get him. And you might not like the situation. So I feel like we're assuming Marvin Harrison's situation. I know we're assuming Caleb's, but Caleb's feels at least a little bit more secure in that position. And I think we're all assuming Marvin goes to the Cardinals. There could be a trade down, there could be a trade up, there could be a lot of different things. So again, I think his situation could be a little bit more fluid than we would like to believe. So I think Caleb is just much safer and really more valuable. So
yeah, I feel like the only thing that's saving Marvin's kind of floor in terms of his situation is there's a couple of wide receiver needy teams at that 4-5 spot between the Cardinals and the Chargers, and both of them are going to want to
Yeah.
trade down and let someone overpay like a mofo to get JJ McCarthy, but
Mhm.
both can't do that. So one of them is going to have to sit still and take the best wide receiver prospect in damn near a decade. So it's you feel good that he's going to be getting
Drafted
his
in the top 5 probably.
he's going to be drafted in the top 5, and he's either going to go to Kyler Murray or Justin Herbert. And both of those situations, and both teams need a wide receiver desperately. So it feels like there's a floor to that.
I
I'm
will
going.
say this. I will say that the Patriots also need a wide receiver very badly, and they've
That's
been known to do some very funny things.
that's the doom scenario. They just pass on a quarterback, they take a wide receiver, and you've got Jacoby Brissett, Marvin Harrison, Demario Douglas, and Ramondre, and that's really about it. And I think that's probably the doom scenario for him, where there is no good quarterback in the near future.
I think Brissett is just scary enough to make this situation like a reality in your head that could possibly happen. Like if Brissett was like if they had like like Marcus Mariota, if they signed him or they signed trying to think of a few names, but
Sam
like a
Darnold.
word. Yeah, well, yeah, right, yeah, or Mitchell Trubisky or somebody. Like I think Darnold is actually still a fairly interesting prospect. I don't think he's particularly good, but I think he still has some interesting aspects, especially him learning a Shanahan offense for the last year. But yeah, like I mean, if they had a slightly worse signing in terms of a backup quarterback, I would feel a lot better, but they didn't. So I think Brissett, what was it, the last 4 or 5 games? I think Howell came back, but Brissett for 4 games, something like that, made that offense look serviceable. Like um, Dotson was serviceable in that stretch. McLaurin was very good in that stretch, and so if he can do that for those wide receivers, just makes him good enough to make the situation kind of scary.
Again, more talking just the fact the floor of Marvin's situation feels higher than it probably should be for any generic wide receiver. I'm gonna assume
Agreed.
you're sitting at the 102. Are we gonna assume that Marvin is the locked in 102? I think that's probably
Oh
safe to
yeah,
say.
I'm excited if that happens. I might troll the first person a little bit and give him some jab, even though I think Caleb was probably the better pick. Because he's just that exciting. Like you see on every, um, Facebook message board, Reddit. You see all these different places. People are just super excited to get him. They're trading up to get him, and if you get a chance to draft him with the 102, be just as excited. It's a locked in scenario where it's going to be JJ, Chase, CD, um, Marvin Harrison, Nabers if he goes to a really good situation, and Rye you can throw in there, and he's
Just
going to
as
be
the
in there for a
after,
long time.
just as the
So
afterthought, you're forsaking your
yeah,
boy that much. You're literally wearing his jersey.
listen, listen. I mean, there's a difference between being the fourth overall pick and being a generational wide receiver than being,
The fourth
a
round
very
pick.
a fourth round pick who has been amazing and awesome and exceeded every expectation, but has um, some noted physical limitations to just what his ceiling could be. So,
That's fair. I think that's fair. Although
like I read this. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I'd probably take the one. I'd probably take Amon Ra over the 102. It's always tough because I think we've gotten to this. We're in the throes of the draft season where we see all these positives about these wide receivers, and we're just like, okay,
Yeah.
they're good. Like we're seeing all these positives where their values up, and I think we kind of forget that these guys can just not work out. Like we haven't seen.
Oh yeah.
Like we think Marvin's going to be one of the next superstars in the league, and we're pretty damn sure of it. But you know what I know? I know Amon Ra is going to score 20 points per game next year. I know that.
That's very true. Here's something I read the other day. Like, there's only a certain number of wide receivers that can get you 200 or 250 yards a game. I'm not saying every game, but like on that random spurt, like Amon Ra's not ever going to get you, 250 and 2 touchdowns. It's literally, functionally impossible with the weapons they have on that offense and how that offense is ran through their running backs. And so, like Jamar is one of them, CD is one of them, JJ is one of them. Amon-Ra is not one of those guys. He can't put up 50 fantasy points in a random game, which means something. I'm not saying that I wouldn't necessarily take him over the 102, but I think Marvin Harrison, if he does go to the Cardinals, could be one of those guys that can get you 250 and 2 or 3 touchdowns, which is unique.
No, that's 100% a function of basically you've got to have the long speed to go along with the verticality and that explosive that route running. Where we didn't get to my dismay, we didn't get to see the combine measurables for Marvin. I based on I forget the reporter who or the draft analyst who does the freaks list. I think Dane Brugler does it, and I think Marvin was at the top of his list as like one of the biggest like athletic freaks of the draft. I wish we could have just seen that just so we can confirm that he's basically Julio Jones athletically. But I'm willing to bet that he would have dropped a 4.35, and you'd have gotten that long speed to go with one of the best technicians in the college ranks. Let's move on to the 103. It's going to be my pick, and I think this is a very weird part of the draft because you've got this tier break, and I think I'm a little different because if I went to ADP sites right now, I think the 103 is actually trending a lot closer to the 102 than I would actually have it put. But I would probably have the 103 through the 106 probably as a very similarly valued pieces. So what if this is where we really get into the point that it's like, okay, I'm taking needs between the wide receiver and the quarterback. If I need a wide receiver, I'll go Nabers. If I need a quarterback, I'll take Jayden Daniels. I feel like they're about, I feel like there's equivalent ceilings, or I guess much like the Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison debate, I feel better that Nabers is going to hit. I feel like the ceiling on Jayden Daniels' value is higher. So it really just comes down to what my team needs. But if I'm going pure vacuum, taking the player I think is the most valuable right now, I'm going to go Jayden Daniels. As much as I hate it because I love Malik Nabers, but I have to take the man who I think goes to Washington and gets a good surrounding cast, and it has one of the best rushing upsides we've seen in recent memory. Now, again, this is the tough part about doing this 3 weeks before the draft. This really feels like this is the Washington quarterback pick, not Daniels or Maye. It's one of the two, not just Daniels. But for now, I'm gonna slot in Jayden Daniels as that 102 in real life, and I'm gonna put him at the 103 in fantasy.
So if Maye goes to Washington, let's say, and then Nabers does in fact go to the Chargers, would you then put Nabers at the 103?
I would, and that's mostly just because I something about it. I struggle with Maye. I've seen so many mixed opinions about Maye that it's really, and I see what I see on film is a very inconsistent quarterback, and I struggle to. It's not a bet I want to make. I could see him being a Josh Allen and succeeding, and a Justin Herbert and succeeding. I could also see him being just a very high-end backup, which, I wouldn't say that's probably a hot take to say that he has that level, that range of outcomes, but it just the success rate of quarterbacks. I feel like I was looking at this like for the last decade. Even quarterbacks picked high up is like really it's like a 40% hit rate.
Oh yeah, it's so small. I mean, compared to other positions.
And it's like when you combo that 40% hit rate with a player that I don't feel good about, but that's the one thing I've learned about in the last couple rookie drafts. If I don't feel good about a player, I just won't take them, even though what ADP is telling me to do. So if it does go Maye and Nabers, or if it does go Maye and then Daniels in real life, I would take Nabers there because I just think Nabers is legit.
It'll be interesting to see if he does go here. So here's the thing. So if he does go to Washington, so a North Carolina quarterback going the second overall pick, where have we seen that before? Right. And I think it's going to be interesting because everybody's going to be thinking exactly what I'm thinking. Oh my God, I hope he's not Mitchell Trubisky. Right. And so it'll be interesting to see how far Maye falls because of it. He could end up being a really good buy at a certain ADP because everyone's fearing that same second overall North Carolina situation. But yeah, I figured that's what you're going to say. I would 100% agree. Um, I just don't know if I love any quarterback situation in Washington. Like, I like their signing in Eckler. I think it gives their young quarterback a little bit of an out on a lot of different plays, which is nice. You know, they have a decent foundation in place, but I never thought Sam Howell was bad. I didn't necessarily think he was good, but I didn't think he was bad. They made him look bad.
He also made
Yeah,
himself
if you
look
want
bad by holding onto the ball a ton.
a ton, absolutely right.
You don't
He
take that
made
many
their O
sacks
line
without having a little bit of the problem.
absolutely. I don't really feel like they had a great offense in place for the style that he wanted to run. Granted, he didn't really even know what was going on. I mean, he took so many sacks. He made that O line who was, I thought, pretty decent. I mean, he made them look like they were like this 32nd ranked, O line in the league. I don't know. Like, I mean, there's a reason, and I know Seattle's always going to say this, but there's a reason Seattle wanted him. I think a couple other teams wanted Sam Howell as well. I can't remember what the other team that was reported was,
I
but
mean, he's just a really
um,
good cheap backup at this point. Like you feel outstanding with him as your backup for, what fifth round pick rookie contract.
sure. Sure, so you've really only seen one season of him on what could be considered to be a pretty bad team, right? And so yes, he's got a lot of issues. I'm not saying he's some superstar. I'm saying that team around him, those coaches, who a lot of them are gone now, but they made him look a lot worse. And I just don't, it's kind of like some of us not liking any quarterback situation in New England because of the recency bias that we have with their quarterbacks. But yeah, I just worry it's kind of like a Carolina, right? Like you felt good about Bryce, but you didn't feel good about the situation necessarily. Get a little bit of that with the Commanders. So
That's possible. I mean, it is an entirely new regime. Like I think
yeah,
new owner, new coach, new OC, there's a couple new weapons in town. So I think there, while the history does lend itself credence, culture is hard to overcome. There is enough driving forces there to feel like it's like, okay, if they're gonna have a shot to fix it. Whether they do or
hmm
not, it is up to them. But I'm trying not to hold that against them too
bet
much.
against them.
Who?
I mean,
So now it's
I'm
your
going to say
turn.
this really quick.
What's up?
I'm going to say this really quick is that I don't know if there was a coach in the league. Now, there were coaches that I disliked on personal levels per se, but in terms of analytics, in terms of how they commanded the team, commanded the offense, no pun intended, Riverboat Ron was my least favorite coach of easily the last, how long was he there? 4 or 5 years?
Something like that. Yeah.
They kept calling him that, right? Like that's his nickname, but he never was aggressive. He never went with analytics. He never put his players in great positions. That's the one thing I will say is that you are right, and him being gone really could change the direction of that franchise. So
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see. Now, to segue into that,
yeah,
you've got your own choice
I
of
know.
a teamless Neighbors and a teamless Drake May. We haven't found out their draft position. Where are you at between the two at this point? Or is it just simply a
Yeah.
whatever your team needs at this point, they're close enough?
No, no, not for me. I think one of those teams in the top five, whether it be the Cardinals or the Chargers, is going to get Neighbors, and obviously, one of those teams is probably going to, like you said, going to be looking to move down. I find it very hard to believe that, um, even though it's a Greg Roman offense, even though Jim Harbaugh notoriously likes to run the ball, I find it just very hard to believe they're going to go into 2024 with Joshua Palmer and Quentin Johnston. So I find it just very hard to believe they're not going to. Now, could they add people later on in the draft? Absolutely. But when you're sitting at five and you have a chance with Herbert to pair them with one of the best wide receivers analytically that we've seen in a long time, I think they're going to do it. I think you do it. And I think you draft him here. So I'm going to take Neighbors with the, where are we at? 104.
104. That's sick.
104.
I actually like that pick a lot. Although I think there is a chance there's that Neighbors does not wind up in the top five just because of the fact that if everybody just picked down the run and there was no trades, I could see, the Cardinals taking Marvin and Nabers going to the Chargers. Although I think there's a lot of buzz about the idea of Rome going above Nabers, just because I think just for whatever a team needed, they're both equal in terms of actual NFL wide receivers. Just one is more of a ultra dynamic slot guy, and one is the epitome of just an alpha wide, like an X wide receiver. So it depends on what teams need. I could see Nabers falling more towards like the Bears at 9, the Jets at 10. I've seen a little bit, which that would be weird. You get Aaron Rodgers with Garrett Wilson and Malik Nabers. That just feels like you're about to light up the whole world as long as his Achilles doesn't tear again.
Yeah.
But
I mean, 100% agree.
I think everything I'm seeing analytically in terms of like everybody I follow analytically adores Nabers as basically an equivalent to Marvin Harrison, and I think the film community, from what I can see, is more of they see him as slightly limited in terms of his role, but still an exceptionally dynamic wide receiver. So not on the level of Marvin, but I think there's enough consensus there across both sides that you're going to feel pretty good. And I don't see Malik Nabers busting. I could see him kind of, if he hits up in a bad situation, I could see him kind of wallowing in the DJ Moore wide receiver 2 area for a little while. But if he gets the right team, I think he's ready to take off.
I feel like he's going to be like, and I've done this recently, he's going to be a little bit like Stroud was last year, where like this year I'm clicking on all these trades that I click on a player and click on a trade and see where the trade was and where they got drafted and all that stuff, right? Through Sleeper. And every time I click on Stroud, I like to see where he was drafted, 101, I mean, it was like never 101, but it was like 102, 103. And I was looking, and a bunch of them were, the other day, they were like 105, 106. One of them was 108.
I think in the league, I think in my league, he went like 106. Like he was pretty low. If you didn't like him, Maye is gonna be like this, where if your league mates just don't love him, he's gonna fall.
He is, absolutely. But I think Nabers is kind of the wide receiver version of that. And again, 104 is a little bit different than 106. But I think we're going to look back next year and we're going to click on him and we're going to see 104, 105, 106. We're going to say, what were we thinking? Why was he not with a 102, 103, maybe even the 101? Again, like that's going to be hindsight. It's 2020. But I just, the idea of him with Justin Herbert and no one else really in that wide receiving core being scary. Also, they have no running back. I mean, at some point, like I get that they're going to do a run-heavy offense with who they brought in, but like if they don't have a good running back to do that with, they're going to lean on somebody. And you're telling me they're going to lean on Joshua Palmer?
What do you mean? Blake Corum is ready to be drafted.
Is he penciled in?
He's probably, I don't know, but it feels like he's penciled in as like their third round pick right now.
We might be talking about him later.
I mean, it is funny how little. I feel like Gus Edwards went there and nobody noticed and nobody gave a shit, and it's like that might be he might be a wide receiver or an RB2 for nothing next year.
He might be right. He might be this year's Raheem Mostert. Something. He really might be.
He might, because he's got Greg Roman and he's got a good quarterback and he's got a good line. It'll be interesting. Let's jump to the 105. This one's an interesting spot because again, I think. Yep. I think we've talked about it ad nauseum the last few episodes that the top 7 is outstanding. You're going to feel good about any top 7 pick, but I think at this point, this is where I kind of just have to plug my nose and take the quarterback over the can't miss wide receiver and can't miss tight end, just because the ceiling on a quarterback, if he hits, is just way higher than the other two. But you just have to take Drake Maye here, in my opinion. Like it. You can see Rome Odunze is higher than ADP right now, but I think you just have to take Drake Maye, even though I adore Rome Odunze. But it just comes down to ceiling and just and sometimes it's just about value preservation. I feel like quarterbacks in general, unless they are tragically awful, really just preserve their value a lot better than a wide receiver or a tight end. If like Quentin Johnston and Bryce Young had equivalently awful years, and I guess you could probably say both lost equally a first round pick off their value, but you can at least still sell Bryce Young for something. You can't sell Quentin Johnston for anything meaningful at this point.
Right. Yeah,
Just
no, you can still sell Bryce for I just had a person buy him in a league for like a mid to late 2025 and a mid to late 2025 second. Sorry, first and second. So,
that's
I
something.
mean, you're still getting yeah, that's something like that's like I like it for both sides. Like I can go both ways with it. I think it was a good buy more than sell, but yeah, Quentin Johnson, like you said, is he's trending upwards in terms of value, but I think again when people see him play, he will trend back downwards. So
People are just like, oh God, every single other wide receiver in front of him is gone. He has to succeed now. No,
right, like
he just
there's
is,
no one else on that team.
he's allowed to just not. That's also a viable option. Okay, I think we've hit
And
the fun part
yeah,
of the we let's reinforce this is a half tight end premium that comes in very crucially to this decision. I feel like because
it does.
for you got the 106 here and it's basically just between Bowers and Rome, right?
It absolutely is. And I am the notoriously I don't know the right words to use, but I am always notoriously high on tight ends in any sort of tight end premium league. I overvalue tight ends probably. I want to flex and even in half tight end premium, I want to flex tight ends all day. The floor is great, the ceilings are great. Um, so with that, give me Ondunze.
The half tight
I'm
end
gonna throw a
premium is just
curveball
a
at you.
little bit too much, or it's a little too little.
Yeah, if it was full, it would be probably 50-50 for me. I still would probably lean Odunze. So here is why I'm going to give you really quick on here is why I'm not picking Bowers, and you can segue off that especially if that's going to be your next pick. But so where do we think Bowers is going to be mocked to? Like where do we think he's going to go to?
He's had a wide range. To answer your question in a not drawn out way, probably something like either the Jets at 10, Broncos at 12, Bengals at 11 feels or 18 feels reasonable.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's like 60% Jets or 50% Jets, and then like 20% one of those other teams, 20% the other one, and then like 20% somebody else.
Colts I've
I think that's
seen
110%, but what'd you say?
Colts I've seen also in that like 14 I think range.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of different places
Add that to
that you
another
can go.
20. Add that as another 20%. We're at 130%
We're at
chance.
130%. He's going to go somewhere 130% of the time.
He will be drafted. You heard it here first.
Seriously, breaking news. Here's the thing with these teams, especially the Jets, with the video and the tape I've watched on him, the things that you've said, the things that you've highlighted, and how he is a generational tight end, it makes me think two things. One, he's going to be fairly difficult for OCs to understand how to utilize him. And some of the favorite clips you have and that you've shown to me of him is him screens behind the line
jet
jet
sweeps.
sweeps, everything behind the line of scrimmage. I find it very hard to believe that Hackett is going to be able to figure out exactly how to maximize his potential and his generational tight end. And the same,
That's a
little
take
bit
I
with
hadn't heard.
Denver.
That's a take I hadn't heard yet, and that's actually I think that's a really good way to think about that. He's just not gonna utilize him, even if he has all the tape on George Kittle to watch. He'll just not figure it out.
I mean, isn't that what happened with Arthur Smith and Kyle Pitts?
It's
It's
exactly
exactly
what
a similar
happened.
situation.
You got a unique
So
generational piece that you couldn't figure out how best to use him because he didn't fit within your system. So you're like, fuck it,
there it is.
run him into the flat. He'll be good.
And like the one thing that NFL tight ends don't really do is jet sweeps and screens and all these super athletic behind the line of scrimmage plays, and that's what he excels at. He's great at other things. He is good at finding space. Great at finding the seams in his zone, things like that. But what he excels at is getting him the ball in space and letting him do his thing. And I just don't believe that the offensive coordinators for some of those teams that you mentioned, especially the Jets, can find a way to utilize him to maximize his fantasy potential. So especially in half tight end premium, I'm going to go with Odunze. much safer. And this could be one where we look back and we say, oh my God, he really went in the 10, where are we at? 106? 106. I can't believe it. He should have been 103. We could also say, oh my God, like this is another Quentin Johnson situation. Like it was a disaster situation, but he's a better prospect. His situation's almost always going to be better. He's not going to be playing with the Chargers backup quarterback for half the season. So,
No, I mean,
Odunze,
I think
yeah,
Odunze has just kind of gotten lost, had gotten lost in the shuffle in terms of the Marvin and the Neighbors hype, and
yeah,
you categorize the media, I think in general, wants to get the 1 and 2 and then just go from there. And I think
yep,
Odunze, we've seen so many good things, especially because I don't. He's in that same range just because this class is busted of a Johnston, but he's in terms of mock drafts. I think mock drafts he's Johnston. I saw anywhere between like a mid to late first to like an early third. I'm
yeah.
seeing Odunze as a top 10 pick, and I think we saw one of my favorite creators, Matt Harmon at Reception Perception, put out a chart and a profile of him that was the first all green prospect chart that we've seen in his like 4 or 5 years of doing this. He's basically like his comp is basically either a bigger Olave or Devontae Adams. He's just that clean of a guy that
Yeah.
I think you feel like you're 100% going to end up with a really good player, whether he's a league breaking top 10 wide receiver one. It's hard to judge ceilings, but at
Right.
106 here, you're pretty over the moon about getting a guy like Rome.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
And
Like
much
you
the
said
same,
with his,
much the same
yeah,
way you're over the moon about getting Rome at 6. I am over the moon about getting Bowers at 7.
yeah.
It's the equal
I knew you would
feeling.
be.
It. I would agree with you that Odunze, I think in half tight end premium should go 6 and Bowers should go 7, but I think that just reinforces the fact that this draft class is just stupid. That
Yeah.
the tight end that dominated the SEC as a true freshman 18-year-old is sitting here at the 107 in a tight end premium league. It is just you're running up to the podium, you're locking it in, and you're just walking away
Yeah.
because there's always a way, especially tight ends. Tight ends have this weird have a tougher hit rate. Like first round tight ends aren't guarantees, but this is not. We're not talking about the Ebrons of the world. We're talking about a player. If salary cap wasn't a thing, if positional value wasn't a thing in the NFL, he would go top 5 without question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it just depends on his situation. It depends on where he goes. It depends on the OC, the system they run. I gotta believe that for somebody like him, that teams are going to try to mold their system around him to a degree. Again, the Jets scare me, one, because of the OC, but also because Aaron Rodgers is notoriously stubborn, and he has a way he likes to do things, and I just don't like that situation for him necessarily. I think all the other teams that you mentioned probably more than the Jets. Yeah, I mean, but Bowers is special. He's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing I will say too with him is I wonder what's going to happen. You know how we used to talk about Justin Fields last year? You drafted him at like the 109, 110, and you drove him off the lot, and then you could only sell him for like, so what was that? That was like 2.75 or 3 firsts in value at the time. And then you'd have, if you wanted to trade him, he was only worth about 2 firsts in value, somewhere like that.
Yeah.
I do worry about Bauer's value going into next year a little bit, depending on his landing spot and everything like that. I'm smashing it at 1.07 and feeling great about it. I'm just a little worried that if he's not somebody you're going to be able to look and probably move right away. He's somebody where he's locked on your roster probably at least for that first year.
That sounds like a you problem
That's a
more
me
than
problem,
a general. That's not a general fantasy problem. That like that's you have your own style where you need the players that have a high velocity of movement, so you can do your strategy of just trade. Just
but here's what you're forgetting. Not forgetting, but here's what
not accounting for.
Here's what you're not accounting for, in my opinion, is that the leagues and how they're operating are trending towards players are trending towards me rather than trending towards people who are
Roster
like never
builders.
trading. Roster builders, yeah, it's just like complete like draft, like they soak up everything in the draft. They watch college football. They're like making like 2 trades a year, and it's like mid-season because one of their quarterbacks went down. That's the only trade they're gonna make. It's like going the opposite direction. And as Dynasty becomes more popular, especially amongst the gambling community, I think it's going to trend more and more that way. So I think it needs to be not a consideration necessarily, but more on the back of your brain than it was ever before.
No,
Like
that's
five
fair.
years ago, I would never make that point probably.
No, that's fair. It is that kind of situation that people underestimate the idea that the player that's trading in their league, if you're just kind of sitting still and and assembling a really good roster, you could just get left behind by the one guy who's destroying trades consistently and just
Yep.
trading at a high rate and just continually accruing value. Where it's like, okay, I'm gonna have the third best team in the league, but by the time this mofo over here is all said and done, he's just gonna have the number one team by a mile, and my ability to win has gone from like 20% to like 14% just because I've just had a really good team and just held on to it.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And you just don't want to, in my opinion, you don't want to be one of those players. I think the worst position you can be in is to be one of the players in your dynasty leagues and all you're doing is complaining about how somebody is taking advantage of another player or something like that. Like if somebody's in your opinion, if somebody's taking advantage of another player, then you should be sending out trades left and right, in my opinion. You shouldn't be the one complaining. You should be the one being active. Be more active than the player taking advantage, quote unquote. Because again, everyone's an adult in these leagues, everyone's paid their money, and so there's no reason why you can't hit the trade button and send out a bunch of trades. And so it's a consideration. Again, I love Bowers at this spot, but make sure if there is a lot of active trading in your leagues that a lot of your other roster pieces are liquidable to a degree, so that if there are trades going on, you can take advantage of it. Because I don't think he's going to be super movable. So.
I'm about to say everybody's an adult in our league until there's the one kid who apparently is the grandson of another person in the league, and then we find that out 3 trades later.
Damn it. Damn it! Why did you bring that up? Yeah, that
I
is
have to.
absolutely. I know. That's absolutely true. I mean, I never thought that was even. I didn't even know that at the time. I mean, I did to a degree, but I didn't know he was like he was like what, like 13 or something.
He was 11
So,
and probably shouldn't have been
11.
on the website based on the terms of service. But he's probably floating around there somewhere, so it's whatever.
Oh,
Moving
man.
on.
Yeah, I'm sure he's still playing.
You've got I think probably one of the harder decisions in this draft, the 108.
Yeah.
I think some people have slotted in a player here that I think it's justified that he's there, but I think he's created his own tier in a way that I don't think is justified. And I'm curious to see where you end up going, if you go with that or against that.
So here's the thing: if I don't pick him, who am I picking? That's the tough part, right? Like it's who has the, and I know. So we're talking about, I'm assuming JJ McCarthy.
We're not. I'm not. I'm talking about.
Oh, you're not?
I have seen Brian Thomas Jr. has. Well, let's actually pull up. What's the ADP here?
I thought you were talking about JJ McCarthy,
I have
because I feel like
ADP
you could say
sitting
the same about him.
Oh, 87 versus 93. So this is actually a tier of 2. It would seem more like that. You've got Brian Thomas and JJ McCarthy sitting here, where it's like, okay, this JJ might go in the 104 in real life, and Brian Thomas might wind up on the Jaguars as a stud with a stud quarterback. So that's really I feel like where it comes down to. What say you?
Yeah. I thought you were talking about JJ McCarthy, and so I mean, definitely Brian Thomas, like you said, they're in the same tier. I just don't view them like as similar
tiers of prospects. Who do you feel is a better real life player? Not even fantasy.
Brian Thomas.
Okay, that's who I would agree.
Brian Thomas, who I feel like is going to hold their value more for a longer period of time, and probably has higher fantasy upside in terms of value. I would say JJ McCarthy.
That's the tough part. Is like even it's the I'm looking at it, it's the Caleb versus Marvin, it's the Daniels versus Nabers, it's the Maye versus Odunze decision. It's just at some point if you feel like there's a an outstanding wide receiver and a slightly shittier quarterback prospect, you just have to take the quarterback prospect, especially in a league as deep as this.
I agree 100%, man. And it's like I don't I'm an MSU fan. I've unfortunately, watched a lot of Michigan games, MSU games. JJ McCarthy he is one of the players of all time. And and
Hey, that is Mr. 8 attempts in a Michigan game or in a
I
game.
watched I watched a lot of that game and I regret wasting my time doing so. So here's the thing, in my opinion, is that I think he has mobile Brock Purdy upside. And we both, I think, agree that Brock Purdy is pretty undervalued. And I don't think that again, I think Purdy is good. I think he is a bit of a product of his situation and coaching. But there's things he does that a lot of quarterbacks can't do. And I think that's the same with JJ McCarthy. If he's put into a good right situation and he has a good OC and has a few weapons. But again, if we're talking about him at the Giants, I mean,
I
that
think
coaching to me is sus, and the weapons are even more sus.
this is the hard part. This is one of the hardest parts about this. What we're doing right this second is this. We're like you said, we're in the middle of smokescreen season, and then the JJ McCarthy love of the Vikings trading up to wanting him, and all these teams wanting him screams to me. Will Levis being the odds-on favorite for the 10, I think he was the odds-on favorite for like the 101 or 102 at one point last year. Malik Willis being mocked to the Lions at 2 at one point when he went in the third round. This is one of those things, and it creates this unfortunate knock-on effect for fantasy where it's like, okay, we have to at least recognize that to a certain degree. And I remember there were startups in 2021 where Malik Willis, not Malik Nabers, Malik Washington. Just I got rookies on my brain. Malik Willis was going in like the 4th round of startups because he was this super mobile, super high upside guy who was about to become a top 3 quarterback pick, and that's valuable historically. But it's like, okay, there's a world where JJ McCarthy, this is this year's smokescreen, and he's just a 2nd round pick, and you've wasted a 108 for it.
I mean, true, absolutely true. But like, I mean, we're watching the Titans literally build their team and do everything in free agency around their 2nd round pick, right? And I would argue that he looked okay. I don't think Will Levis. Anyone said. I think outside that first game, I think he looked very average. He looked very Sam Howell-esque.
He looked like he looked like a 2nd round NFL quarterback.
He did, absolutely. Now
those usually don't look very good.
Right. And so, okay, you throw Tony Pollard in the backfield, you throw Ridley, as their wide receiver too. And if they do something exciting at tight end, who knows? So, I mean, they get another, offensive tackle, with their 7th pick. Again, so they're building their team around
this. That's gonna be a great team for Shadir Sanders next year.
Yeah, okay, right. So, but still, I mean, Will Levis is still going for. I mean, we've both traded and sold Will Levis. Like he's still going for a late 1st, early 2nd.
I'm about to say, I've sold. I think I've basically sold every.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you, but like, okay, so JJ McCarthy. So this is kind of the point. Like, even if JJ McCarthy has a very mediocre season, but as long as he's a starter and they continue to develop and build the team somewhat around him, he's always going to hold an inherent value that I don't think a wide receiver is going to hold.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. Quarterback has the ceiling and has this and retains the value floor. That's why I agree with your position.
If he goes to the Vikings,
that's the perfect spot for him. That's the ceiling situation for him.
Absolutely. I can't, like, that would be really exciting as in the state of Michigan, a lot of Michigan fans would be able to see him twice a year, and some love him, some hate him. It's such a cool dynamic that would happen if that's the case. So from a fantasy perspective, to have JJ and Addison and Hawkinson when he comes back, and to have an offensive minded coach that, they like to do really creative things. That's exciting. The idea of him going to the Giants with their slew of mediocre slot receivers and Waller, who's going to retire maybe. ish.
and NFL
Oh my
superstar
God.
Devin Singletary.
Right. Oh my God. And as much as I love Singletary, and I do, and I think he's I think he's very underrated. I mean, if Saquon Barkley couldn't fix that, how is Devin Singletary? How is JJ McCarthy going to come in? Again, I don't think he's that much of an improvement over Daniel Jones as much as I dislike Daniel Jones. I kind of just equally kind of just dislike McCarthy. I don't know, but in terms of fantasy, I got to go with the ceiling and the floor, who I think is better here, and I'll go with JJ. So
Okay, a little bit of a tangent here. Are
yeah,
are the Giants undervalued? Because I feel like we're a year removed away from Daniel Jones being a top 10 fantasy quarterback and Brian Dable being seen as like the next
Coach of the
great
year.
QB whisperer, QB developer,
Oh,
where it's like, okay, last year I wanted Anthony Richardson to go to the Giants so bad because I just wanted him to have Dable developing him because that's how I viewed Dable. That's how highly I viewed Dable. So if one of these quarterbacks goes to Dable, are we underrating the fact that Dable still should be good and got a lot of production out of something named Tommy DeVito?
yeah, that situation was so messed up last year, and for them to, I mean, and again, I'm trying to think back, but
Didn't
didn't
they
they
win
win a
six
couple
times?
games?
They won 6 games, I thought, or
I
some
was gonna
some.
say they won a couple games at the end of the season. Like I don't know if they ended 3-3 and 4-2 or something like that, but I know they won a couple games and looked okay, and their slot receivers just kind of worked and meshed, and Tommy DeVito was. I mean, I don't even know how to even describe
An
that.
Italian.
Yeah, an Italian.
That's
I mean,
it.
he looked okay. Like they made him look okay. So, um, Daniel Jones might be undervalued, but he's still somebody, and it's tough for me to say this because usually I only care about value. I'm not even buying him. I just can't even get behind the idea. It just sounds so gross and so disgusting because you're gonna have to probably spend what, like a 207, 208 to get Daniel Jones. Does that sound about right?
I would say probably yeah, early to mid second. I would say probably mid second.
Sure. Are you trading that pick for Daniel Jones? I mean,
I
even if
would.
you consider that, would you?
I would. Fields or Jones right now?
Fields. I don't even need to.
Oh wow. I think I might take Daniel Jones.
There are so many people who still feel like Fields is not only a starting level quarterback, but think that Russell Wilson is the epitome of. I'm going to say mediocre, but they think a lot worse than that. So,
Which is fair. If you watched him play football, you tend to have that last year. You tend to have that opinion.
but when you have the same of Daniel Jones, like I mean, again, like I believe Sleeper's description of his 2022 season at this point, 2022 season was Daniel Jones dinked and dunked to a top 10 finish. That doesn't exactly scream like, okay, I gotta have this guy for the 206 on my roster. Like I'm excited to see him come off injury so he can dink and dunk his way. It's just like so maybe all these things do make him undervalued, but yeah, I would take Fields again. Like it's close though.
Yeah, I would if I don't have the ability to pull up my stuff because now we're on a video podcast, but I would bet Fields is a lot more expensive than Jones, and I think they should probably be a lot more equal. But moving on to something that's a little
Agreed.
bit more on topic, where I've got the 109 here, and I
Yeah.
feel like this is pretty safely a wide receiver pick. I don't like. I think unless you love a Penix or a Bo Nix and they go super high, I think there's enough of these really, 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 really talented wide receivers sitting here that
Yeah.
you're really kind of locked into one of them. Now, to me, it's between Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy, and Adonai Mitchell, and I think I would probably tend to lean Brian Thomas Jr. I think Worthy probably deserves, as long as Worthy goes in the first round, I think he deserves to be on that level of Brian Thomas Jr., where he's slotted into that like 109 spot. But I think
Yeah.
until we see that happen, give me the safer guy who really reminds me of a more athletic T. Higgins. And I think that's the kind of guy that if you get him at 109, you're feeling really good about it.
Yeah, he's isn't he really long? I forget what his measurables were,
He's
but they
like
were
six. He's like 6'3", 215. Runs a 4.3 4, I think, if I remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's 4.34.
Jumps
Yeah,
out of the
with
building. Reception
it's really tough
perception.
to pass on that guy.
Reception perception. I think his profile is going up on Monday, but I think I saw on Twitter that he actually had a pretty good route tree. A lot of greens on his route tree. I think he's 7 greens, 3 reds that had, I think, for like outs and comebacks. So he's still not perfect in terms of that, but his route tree is a lot more developed than I think some people gave him credit for. So I think you add that, you add a very. It always hurts to buy the 1-year wonder who did a lot of things under a Heisman winning quarterback season, but I think he's shown enough in the process that I think he's worthy of the 109 pick.
Didn't he have like 17 touchdowns or something insane like that?
It was bonkers. Yeah, I don't know what know what the exact number was, but it was in the double digits, high double digits. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I mean, I don't think you can go wrong here. I think once we get to this spot in the draft, it's like you said, it's whatever you deem to be positionally valued higher on your team. Again, and I talk about this all the time, but very league dependent, especially in a 10-man. I know we're doing a 12-man draft, but if it's a 10-man, very league dependent. Even with the 12-man, very league dependent. If you're looking to make trades and do other things, but yeah, very team dependent, league dependent. But yeah,
I think one question I would have for you. So, in a draft like this, let's say because I feel like we've hit a fall off. Like we're right at that next tier of like Brian Thomas Jr., where let's say you are rebuilding, you're firmly rebuilding, your roster's crap, and you have the 109. If you had 2 offers sitting in front of you, one was for a future late 25 first and late 25 second, or a 204 and a 205 this year. Are you taking either of those, or are you just taking Brian Thomas Jr. here?
So the answer to that question depends on if I thought my team was going to be significantly worse in competing this year by taking the future picks. If it was and it did, and I did, then I would take the 204 and 205? Yeah, I would take those. But if I, in a few of my leagues, I'm very, very competitive. I feel like my team would not struggle moving that pick to the 2025 draft. I like the idea of the value ascending and not descending, right? And again, that player that you draft could end up being really good, could end up being, for lack of a better phrase, the next Puka or whatever. But I kind of like moving the draft capital back. So it depends on how competitive you think your team is going to be and how desperate you are for whatever position you're going to take. Like, let's say you're going to take J.J. McCarthy with the 109, and somebody's willing to give you, a 2025, like you said, first and second, and you're sitting there with 3 quarterbacks, and it's like, you've got like Kyler Murray, Jordan Love, and Aaron Rodgers or something. Just probably move that pick to 2025, get the extra capital, have that value, not being able to be injured or something like that, or that value can't go to a bad situation, right? And so I would move it. Again, it's like a reroll, but you get the added draft capital. But yeah, I mean, if you're sitting there with like, you have like Josh Allen, Will Levis, and Daniel Jones or something, or even without Daniel Jones, I feel like you got to draft J.J. McCarthy or take the 204, 205 and take the Bo Nix and the Penix, type players. So
no, I think I kind of.
What about you?
I think it really. I think the way I phrased the question, I would probably take the 204, 205 because in this class, I think the difference between taking 1 shot at a Brian Thomas Jr. and 2 shots at a Lad McConkey, Ricky Pearsall, Roman Wilson tier, I think I'd rather have the latter of those. I think you put it pretty well that like it depends on where I'm at. If my team is legit, I would probably want to just preserve the future capital and just have it in a currency that you can spend later more safely. Mm-hmm. If I feel like my team was on the verge of competing, I'd probably want a Brian Thomas Jr. as a starter. And if my team was awful, I would want 2 stabs at these mid seconds to see if I couldn't get ascending players. Like last year, if you use those mid seconds and you hit on them, you got a Zay Flowers and a Sam Laporta or something along those lines. Or you got a Josh Downs and a Michael Mayer where you just kind of retain value. But
Right.
in some bad cases, you got two pieces that just didn't work out, like a Mims level guy or something like that. Which I got a lot of Mims, so I'm
A
gonna
lot of
pray
Mims.
that I'm gonna
Mims
pray
is
that he
looking good.
I'm gonna pray that he bounces back and with the Judy move, he gets to recover a little bit. But yeah, I would if my team was to answer my original question, if my team was awful, I would want 2 seconds just to see if I couldn't
Absolutely.
accumulate more capital and move on. Now, moving on to the 110, who are you feeling like with this pick?
I'm gonna go off the draft board a little bit. I'm gonna go, and I'm probably gonna get trolled for this a little bit.
Oh,
And we talked about this guy a little bit earlier, but I'm gonna go Blake Corum.
Corum. So
I'm
first
going Corum.
running back off the board. I have to scroll down for this.
I know. I know. I'm going to go off the board a little bit. I do think, kind of like Caleb is penciled into, I think the Chargers are going to find any way that they can to get Blake Corum. I just cannot believe that they would go into the season. They're going to get a running back somewhere, right? Now, it may be even later in the draft, maybe the third or fourth round, but I don't think so. I think Jim Harbaugh likes his guys. I mean, look at his interviews with in terms of talking about JJ McCarthy. He's by far the best quarterback in this draft. He likes his guys. He says these things to boost his guys, and I think he likes Blake Corum. I think Blake Corum's got that dog in him. I mean, he was the heart and soul of that Michigan team who won a natty. So again, it's less about the player, although I love the player. It's more about what teams I think he could potentially go to, especially the Chargers. So.
That's possible. You could see a Giants. You could see a Chargers pick. I think I tend to agree with you that probably one of these running backs is going to surprise us with their landing spot and wind
Yep.
up being a late first in rookie drafts. I would tend to believe that's not going to be Blake Corum. I could be wrong, but to me, he seems a bit limited. He seems like a late day 2 pick, maybe even a 4th round pick. And if he goes in the fourth
Yep.
round, I think you're not going to want him here at the 110. But I buy the idea that one of these running backs is going to sneak up a lot higher in draft capital than we think, and they're going to wind up at some point. People do need running backs, so this late first is going to wind up being some sort of running back. Now, which one? Who knows?
Yeah, that's the tough part. I mean, again, I don't think a lot of these running backs have the resume that really sets them apart from all the others. Again, I watched a lot of Michigan games, just hating them because I'm an MSU fan, and he was really. I just I think the league is trending with the MCDCs of the world, with the Jim Harbaughs of the world, some of these coaching hires where they're favoring the player's personality and how they played the college game a little bit more than just straight metrics.
Culture matters as
Um,
much as the tangibles. The intangibles matter as much as the tangibles.
Yeah, and I don't. I mean, it's tough because I agree with that because I've seen the turnaround with the Lions, but I also disagree with that, and I do think a lot of these teams can't afford to do that.
I was about to say
And so,
it's really nice when the intangibles mix with the tangibles, and you get Jameer Gibbs at
correct.
12, who is both one a true not to be cliched, he is a lunch pail guy where he is just the quiet, hardworking like Nick Chubb style, and also is just one of the most dynamic players in the league. So it's
Yeah, and we
nice
got
when you get
lucky
that
and hit on
luxury.
that. Yep, I mean, we got lucky hit on him and Amon Ra and a few other guys in the draft who are like that. Sewell. I mean, just destroying O line, or D line players. I mean,
Branch,
his
Laporta, all those guys, Campbell, all those guys are kind of that mix.
they come in, they're quiet, they do their job, but more importantly, they love playing football, and they were like dogs in college. And so I know that phrase gets used kind of memely, but that's how I kind of view Blake Corum, and he just fits the mold to me of a team that needs a running back, and he's going to come in, he's going to work really hard, he's going to do as good a job as he can. Is he physically limited? He is, and that's going to be an issue a little bit with, I think Chargers O-line is not particularly great. And so that could be, and again, Gus Edwards is not as bad as people would like, to believe fantasy-wise at least. Nor in real life. So it's going to be an interesting scenario. And again, you could go with a few different running backs here. I do think a running back is the way I'm going to go. Um, my preference though, again, so this goes back to the last question that you asked me. If we can roll that pick into a 2025 pick,
This is
think
where
in
you really just want to move down, right?
absolutely, yes. And if you can think back in your leagues to last year during the season, and those two teams decided to have a tankathon in the middle of the season, and they're selling their Alvin Kamara's and their Nick Chubbs and whoever for now think back to what they were selling them for, late 25 first, early 25, 25 seconds, things like that. That's why you hold on to the capital. If you can make it to that spot and you're 5-2 and 4-3, and they start tanking, you could pick up a much better valued guy with that future capital. Like you said, get that currency that you can spend later on in the season than the value of having the Blake Corums would be.
No,
So
that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. I would agree. Now, moving on to the 111, we gotta come close to wrapping up here with our last two picks. This is to me, I think with the Stephon Diggs move, I think this almost winds up just being whoever the Bills wind up with. If they you would have to imagine they use their first round pick on a wide receiver, and I this feels really just like the Buffalo Bills wide receiver pick here, maybe even earlier.
hmm
I would guess that if he's available to them, they would go with an Adonai Mitchell because I think they've got a lot of small like they've got your Curtis Samuel as like a backfield guy. You've got your Khalil Shakur as a flanker slot guy. They really need a bigger body. So even though I believe Worthy is a better wide receiver overall fantasy prospect, I think you have to just take Adonai Mitchell, who I do think goes to the Bills here, and I do think is a good enough football player to really to be a good wide receiver at pick 111.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, trading Diggs was wild and crazy, and especially when you take into account the fact that they lost Gabe Davis in free agency. Not that I particularly like Gabe Davis, but I mean, he was a familiar face on that offense for Josh Allen. So it's going to be a new revamped offense. It'll be really interesting to see James Cook's uh, change in usage. I mean, he wasn't the highest usage player in the league. He had almost no goal line opportunities. I think it was like 2 or 3 all year or something like that. How they use him in the pass game, but yeah, I agree. I think Mitchell has been mocked most to the Bills, and you're taking whoever the Bills take. So
Absolutely. And
yeah,
now rounding out our 112, who do you think? Who do you think? I know who I think, but I know I want to know who you think as the 112. I want to see if you're going to
yeah.
surprise me again with a pick.
I might. I'm taking a look at a few things.
I feel like we're at the point where there's a tremendous amount of players that you could go. This is a very flat tier of like 7 guys that you could go and grab at this point.
So I'm going with this is kind of a cop up, but I'm going with the quarterback who goes to the best situation between Bo Nix and Penix.
Mm.
And so again, with these late crapshoot I don't want to say crapshoot quarterbacks, but these, is it fair to say these Will Levises of the world ish quarterbacks? Again, I'm taking the one that goes to the best situation that has I think they both have similar upsides, although in probably different ways. I don't think Penix was used in his offense the way he should have been. I think he had something like, I forget what it was, like 89 rushing yards over 3 years or something really low right that.
It was.
And
It was. I think he had. I think it was literally like 400 rushing yards in his career, or something bonkers like
isn't
that.
that insane? I just can't imagine.
Especially when you put it into context of his pro day, where he ran like a 4.55, which is like a 98th percentile quarterback 40. Like,
And you got him sitting back in the pocket 99% of plays, just trying to like put him in a position that he's not. I'm not saying that he doesn't excel at that position. I'm saying that he could excel at other aspects, right? Like that running aspect. So because we know rushing is so broken, I lean Penix. I'm sorry, I lean Penix. But if Bo Nix goes to a better situation, I'd probably just take him.
yeah, I'm a slot Penix just for the sake of putting a player in that position. But
Yeah.
I would tend to agree. The only thing I would probably disagree with you, and I'm a little. I think it really shows how good this class is, especially kind of like last year's class where some of these seconds are really good. I think in last year's class, Xavier Worthy would have been probably that 108, like that
Yeah.
108, 109. And I think the fact that in this year's class, like in this mock draft, he's at best a 201, really speaks to the idea that this class is really, really nice. And I would, I think Xavier. Well, again, part of it is we need to see where he ends up getting drafted. If he gets drafted in like the second round, that probably points to him just being a limited speed guy. If he gets drafted in the first round, that points to him being more of a complete player who also got to post one of the best 40 uh,
Yep.
in the history of the combine in a nice, on a nice field, but still did do it.
Yep.
But yeah, I think. And one last note, I think you put Blake, you drafted Blake Corum at the 110. I think if any quarter running back's going to sneak up into that spot, it's going to be Jonathan Brooks. Like we're going to get, I think we're going to get, we, if it wasn't for his injury, I think we could have gotten a late first Jonathan Brooks pick in real life. Because
Yeah.
I think his comp, he really reminds me of like a Najee, where
Yeah.
he's just a really good do it all, jack of all, like a very good jack of all trades, master of none kind of back that would have snuck into that a good draft capital in a good situation and would have been, I think, is going to be that late first guy. But with his injury, it gets into a little bit of flux. But that's really, it's really just an indicator that this class is really good.
It's gonna be really interesting. I think the running backs are probably the most interesting of the groups. I mean, just in terms of like no one really knows what position. I mean, we have an idea more so with the wide receivers and where they're going to go than what rounds even some of these running backs are going to go in. And I think it's the more interesting of the two groups. I think quarterbacks and running backs, to me, the wide receivers are the best group. But there's so many needs, and you can just pencil them in for a lot of these different places, and they get drafted so high. Running backs are just they're undervalued right now, and there's not any that really stand out. And I think again, teams are going some different directions, especially with their running back rooms. Than there's just it's hard to predict. Whereas wide receivers a little bit easier. So
That's understandable. With that, that's our first round. That's 1 through 12.
there we go.
You can mock our mark as much as you want, but it is ours. But with that being our first video episode, I thought that was a good one, man. How about you?
Yeah, I loved it. We did a good job. Yeah, I think. Well, troll us in the comments if we didn't, but like and subscribe most importantly, and we appreciate you guys, and we love doing this, and we wish we could even do it more. So, but thanks for joining us on a Sunday morning for us at least.
For you, might be a Thursday afternoon when I actually put this out.
Yeah, but we appreciate it, and take care. Have a great weekend. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening.